Woe to you, O earth and sea, for the devil sends the beast with wrath, because he knows the time is short. Let him who hath understanding reckon the number of the beast, for it is a human number. Its number is 666.
You're listening to Interactive Wrestling Radio, featuring the interactive interview, courtesy of WrestlingEpicenter.com.
This is the Sinister Minister, Father James Mitchell, and you are listening to me on the Wrestling Epicenter.
These numbers that you see beside our show are not happenstance. They're not numbers I just put on these videos for my some kind of numbering system. They are the number of episode that we've conducted right here at WrestlingEpicenter.com. Be it the interactive interview, interactive wrestling radio, the Wrestling Epicenter when we were back on AM radio, the Weekend Warriors of Wrestling, 3 Count Wrestling, the Pile Driver. If we had an interview on the show, it goes on this numbered list. And this, my friends, is 666. Who better to have on episode 666 than the Sinister Minister himself, Father James Mitchell? That was fun. I understand why he does that. That's so much fun to do. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the little intro. Shout out to Iron Maiden and Vincent Price, the great Vincent Price, and the great Iron Maiden for that matter. Before I start sounding too much like Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, great to talk to Father James Mitchell again. We last had him on in 2003, maybe early 2004. And man, it was a great conversation back then, but here we are in 2019. He's still with Impact Wrestling after a long layoff, over 10 years or close to 10 years away. He is back and he is involved with the ladies and the Undead Realm and Rosemary and Jessica Havoc and Sue Young and everything that's going on with those great performers, the knockouts that are really stealing the show over at Impact Wrestling. Thank you guys for tuning in to 666 right here at the Wrestling Epicenter. Lots of milestones, and I'm looking right at you, number 1000, because we're coming for you, buddy. Stay tuned for the interview with Father James Mitchell right here on Wrestling Epicenter.
This is Rosemary, and you are in the Wrestling Epicenter.
Hey, everybody, this is Joseph Park, and you're listening to Interactive Wrestling Radio.
Welcome back to Interactive Wrestling Radio. On the Newsmaker line with us right now is the perfect guest for our episode number. If you're keeping track at home, this is episode number 666. And he is the Sinister Minister, Mr. Father James Mitchell. Mr. Mitchell, are you with us?
I am. How the hell are you?
I'm doing great. So it's such a pleasure to have you back on. Gosh, it's been over 15 years since we had you on the first time. So pleasure to keep doing this and have you on again.
Cool. All right. Great. Thanks for having me.
All right. So let's see here. With Impact Wrestling, you're getting ready to head over to Sin City. I'm getting more of a kick out of that than I probably should. But you're heading over to Sin City with Impact Wrestling. You returned to Impact last year, involving Abyss and Congo Kong. What kept you away from wrestling for so long before returning in last year?
When I disappeared in 2008. I sat back for a while, and I figured they would call me, which they usually did. I was usually never gone from there more than 9 months or a year tops. And I just, frankly, got burned out and aggravated, and quit watching wrestling, and and then I didn't pursue it, for the longest time, and probably in late 2016 or the summer of 2016, I decided that I suffer from what I believe Roddy Piper used to call the sickness. I realized that I needed to start putting my toe back in the water, and I decided to start doing some indie shows down here in the Florida area. And a promoter had called me and wanted to know if I would work with Abyss at a show he was doing in Cocoa Beach, Florida. So I said, well, if he's okay with it, I am. And I hadn't spoken to Abyss in years at that point. So it was funny. I was scrolling through my phone trying to find which one of the two Abyss numbers I had was the actual one to contact him with. And I was just about to put my finger down to dial it. And he called me and asked me if I wanted to come to Slammiversary that year. So I did that. And because I was not happy with the way my career had just suddenly disappeared, and, I was just dropped from history, it felt like, I figured it was going to be my last hurrah, and I wanted to kind of go out on at least say goodbye or something, a proper send-off. So we did that crazy match with
Shark Boy and Josh Matthews.
Matthews and Abyss and Shark Boy and all that, that broken universe type of thing. And and I'd been gone so long, I wondered, if anybody even remember me, but as I recall, I probably got the biggest pop of the night for my cameo. So I figured that I put the bow on it, I was going to be done. And then fast forward from that, maybe 6 months later, then they called and wanted me to do the thing with Congo Kong and Jimmy Jacobs and Abyss, which I figured at that point was just going to be a matter of me coming in to pass the torch to the new manager and the new monster. And I figured that was going to be the end of it. Did that, had fun, put it to bed. And I don't know, 6 months after that, I got another call. And then I came back with the girls, which has been a lot of fun, really interesting. Women's wrestling changed a lot in the last 10 years while I was gone. So it's been exciting to see the changes, been exciting to see how much how much the women have really picked their game up from just being like a pretty attraction to actually women that can go in there and kick ass. And it also, gives me my own little corner of the universe to work in, So it's been exciting. I'm really enjoying it.
Absolutely. I got a couple more questions about those guys, the girls that you're working with, as we go on. But I wanted to ask you, Abyss was one of the mainstays for Impact Wrestling, and then he kind of left almost immediately after, like 3 months after we had just announced that he signed a new contract. I found it kind of odd. I guess my question is, do you think that the lack of Abyss leaves and this is cute, a black hole in Impact Wrestling, not having him around?
Well, look, I think in any company, when you have somebody that was that much of an integral part of it, he cast a very long shadow, and he had a lot of friends there, and he made did a lot of positive things, so his presence is felt to this day. But the company is slowly but surely reorganizing. The new management came in and picked up the pieces. They went back to ground zero and had to start a rebuilding process. I was concerned at first that when he left, it would leave a spot, that couldn't be filled. And I don't mean him personally, but, just somebody who had that much experience and that much input over everything creatively over the years. But, they seem to have been doing really well here with the new management, with Ed Nordholm and Don Callis and Scott DeMore running things.
Right.
And Abyss is getting to spend his golden years in the wrestling business. Excuse me. Getting that nice WWE producers money and all the road expenses paid for and all that. So, I think it's worked out for everyone all the way around. And, it would be great to see him come back somewhere down the road. But, I think both sides are doing really well at the moment.
Very cool, very cool. So in my introduction of you, I mentioned the word Sinister Minister, and, it's strange, because if you really think about it, ECW probably didn't have nearly as many viewers in reality that some of the other shows run, namely Nitro and Thunder and working for WCW did.
Right.
Are you surprised that the ECW name, the ECW persona of the Sinister Minister has such a lasting impact on people, maybe even more so than James Vandenberg did?
Well, it should have more of a lasting imprint than James Vandenberg did, because, James Vandenberg was the manager of a gimmick that Blood Runs Cold that was doomed from the start. The day Eric Bischoff hired me, I've said this a million times, he said, this gimmick's dead, but we're already committed to it on paper, so we've got to, at least let it run its course. And he said, I'm going to be the guy to get rid of managers and tag teams, which he essentially did. But, that there was only so much I could do in WCW. But had I not been there, I would have never been able to go on and do the other things I did. So, I will always be grateful to Eric Bischoff for the opportunity that he gave me. And then the thing with ECW, the reason I'm probably remembered well there is that was the first time I really got a chance to step out and spread my wings, So it was the, what do they call it? The tester version or the prototype of what I would go on to become. But I was given a lot of freedom to experiment and do things. And it's funny, some of the fans remember a lot of that stuff more fondly than I do. So some of it I really like. Some of it I want to crawl into a fetal position and hide when I see it. But that's the nature of what happened in ECW, because, when you're waiting around until 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning to do promos, sometimes me and Mikey would hit the sauce a little bit. Some of the stuff that we thought was brilliant at the time was so brilliant in hindsight. But I wouldn't want to wash ECW off of my resume at all.
Absolutely not. No, and it's kind of funny. My wife's from England, and I said to her, "I'm going to have James Mitchell on," and she gave me a look of knowledge, and I said, "Sinister Minister," and it kind of like light bulb, bing, went on. I'm thinking,
right.
How does that work? That somebody from England who, theoretically that wasn't necessarily within ECW's reach, but there you go. It transcended a lot of barriers, I think.
Yeah, well, that's Paul Heyman's legacy. I mean, and Paul changed the landscape with ECW, and there's a reason that WCW and WWE were stealing all of his talent. They were the little team that could, and they produced people who got to learn under Paul Heyman's tree. Generally, turned out to really be some shining pieces of talent. And
absolutely,
a lot of the people in ECW went on to make a much bigger mark in the business. If you remember, after Bischoff had fired Steve Austin because he quote unquote didn't see anything in him, Paul let him come to ECW and get his mojo back together, and he went, after a little stay there to get his head back together and get his self-esteem put back in place. He went to WWE and went on to become probably the biggest wrestler that ever had at that point.
Absolutely. All right, so we kind of already talked about it, but your involvement in Impact Wrestling now has you kind of smack dab in the middle of a bevy of beauties involved with the women's wrestling revolution that's going on right now. What do you think of that? How do you like, as a guy who's been around for quite some time in the wrestling industry, how do you like seeing the girls kind of taking center stage and in some cases taking the main event stage?
Well, I do now, but I'll in all candor, if you would have asked me 10 or 15 years ago, would I want to be involved with women's wrestling, I would say no. And the reason I say that is this. When I first started in the business almost 30 years ago, or yes, it has been 30 years ago now, women's wrestling was very different. It was the Fabulous Moolah era. And I managed glamour girl Judy Martin, who was, former WWF tag team champion with Leilani Kai, if I'm not mistaken. But the women wrestlers, that generation of like Medusa and Sherry and those girls, those women disappeared, right? And then the women wrestlers, it was almost like they were just grabbing pretty girls and they were all doing the same match. There were like 4 spots that they'd rehearsed and everybody kind of did the same thing. And they were much prettier to look at, but the level of athleticism was not there. So that's not something I would have signed up for back in the day. But, when I came out of my wrestling coma, it was like Rip Van Winkle waking up under a tree, 10 years later, and the entire world had changed. Everything in wrestling's changed. But one of the things I was glad to see was that the women are out there. They are competitive with the men. I mean, they've got their promo game together, which most of them never had. And the level of athleticism that they're displaying now, instead of just tits and ass cat fight kind of stuff, is really, really awesome. And, I've been involved with Sue Young and Havoc, and they've been involved in an ongoing feud for a while now, like with Taya Valkyrie and Rosemary, are 2 of the most incredible female talents, or talents, period, And, that you've got Tessa Blanchard there, who's just amazing. I mean, it's an exciting time to be there. And like I said a little earlier, it allows me to have a little place carved out for myself as a mouthpiece for the women over here, and I'm really enjoying it. It's an exciting time to be in the wrestling business.
Absolutely. You mentioned the wrestling coma, and I'm hoping that with what we're seeing right now, with various companies all having success, Impact being at the forefront of that, WWE continuing on what they're doing, and of course the bringing back wrestling to TNT of AEW.
Right.
Are you thinking that we could be seeing some more people come out of their wrestling coma and maybe see another boom period here?
I would hope. In fact, it was just announced Ken Shamrock's coming back to pro wrestling. So I should see him in Vegas tomorrow. But it's really been an interesting time, because independent wrestling for years was just sort of what you did to learn your ropes, and it was also where you went when it was time for your career to go in the toilet. And now you can actually make a full-time career, full-time living, if you have talent on the independent circuit, in the houses that so many of these groups are drawing now. It's not just 50 or 100 people in the National Guard Armory. The promoters are actually making money instead of losing their ass because you're bringing in all this talent. So, we're on the cusp of, I think, of another big change in wrestling. Where exactly it's going to lead, I don't know, but I've been able to ride a couple of those waves already. So this being my third, I was in on the Monday Night Wars wave as well, which was an exciting time to be there. So, I'm glad to be back. And, in some ways I feel like the aging old gunfighter in the old Westerns, who comes back for that one last gunfight, or, like High Plains Drifter or Begotten or whatever it was called, Unforgiven with Clint Eastwood.
Right.
And it's funny. I've found myself now, when I say 10, 15 years ago when I was in Impact, I would see guys like Bob Backlund and Larry Zbyszko walk in and think, man, what on earth are these guys doing here? They've been so many other places, and they're, why would they want to have anything to do with all these kids, And I kind of find myself, I am now that guy, and I enjoy being able to impart wisdom upon those who come to me and ask for it, And when I first got there, I told Abyss, man, I feel like a kid who just transferred schools in the 6th grade. I don't know any of these people, and, they're all in their 20s, and I said, I'm not, I was a little awkward there for the first day or two. And he said, these kids grew up watching you. Look how old they are. They grew up watching you. So when you're standing in the locker room, they're not going, oh, who's that asshole? I don't want to talk to him. They're going, oh, my God, I used to watch this guy, and once I jumped that hurdle, then, I was able to realize my place in the food chain and what I was doing and just dive in head first. And I've been having a blast.
Absolutely. As you put it in our first interview, do you still sing for your supper? Is that still what you do on the aside from professional wrestling?
Yes, I most certainly do. That one has not let me down yet. In fact, I'm going to go sing in tropical storm winds here when we get off the phone. So that lies ahead.
Yes, be safe out there, by the way.
I certainly will. Thank you.
All right. One of the last questions is a silly one for you. Do you miss your long hair?
Yes, I do. Unfortunately, I was fighting a losing battle with Mother Nature, and I could have either looked like Benjamin Franklin or an aging guy in a rock and roll cover band, the fat guy who still wants to be Eddie Van Halen and doesn't have the hair for it, or I could reinvent myself somewhat, which I kept the eyebrows and the beard, but I refined the beard a little bit, and freshened myself up for a new generation.
Very good. All right, final question. It's kind of a popcorn question for you. What can we expect to see from the Sinister Minister, from Father James Mitchell, going forward in Impact Wrestling?
Carnage, insidiousness, abject evil, and tomfoolery.
Well, I'm looking forward to all of those things. All right. I can't thank you enough for taking the time to do this with us. I get a kick out of the fact that it's number 666, and we had you on and you agreed to do it. So you're a heck of a great guy, and I appreciate you doing this with me.
Thank you so much, James. You have a nice one, and may all of your stains be large ones.
All right. Have a great day. I'll talk to you soon on Facebook.
All right. Bye-bye. Be well.